One person that Stravinsky worked with very closely on this project was well-known artist and ethnographer Rite. And he also worked with the choreographer Nijinsky, who I've already talked about. Just a year previous to the Rite of Spring, he choreographed Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. And what this piece portrayed was Muscovite life in the 4th century before Christ. And it is a work of human sacrifice, and of course, it caused a riot at the premiere. And you all think I'm lying, but this is the case. We have harsh dissonances, violent rhythms, percussive orchestrations, bitonality, polytonality, irregular metrical patterns, violently syncopated accents. And the only way for you to really understand this is to hear it and also to see it, because there actually is a video, and I'm hoping that maybe we can show you a little bit of it. I don't know. This is one of the hardest pieces to play, people. The rhythms come by you so quickly in this last part that it's really almost impossible at times to play. And again, this is a very large orchestra, premiered by the Ballet Russe in 1913. It is in 2 parts, okay? 2 parts. Again, this is a ballet. It's in 2 parts. The Adoration of the Earth is the first part. And within the Adoration of the Earth, we have the Augurs of Spring, Ritual of Abduction, Spring Rounds, Ritual of 2 Rival Tribes, Procession of the Oldest and Wisest, the Kiss of the Earth, and the Dancing Out of the Earth. This is the celebration of spring. And then we have the second part, which is called the Sacrifice. Mystic Circle of the Young Girls, the Naming and Honoring of the Chosen One, Evocation of the Ancestors, Ritual Action of the Ancestors, and Sacrificial Dance. Now, when you think about Tchaikovsky and tutus, right? This is not too far away from that, right? Tchaikovsky died at the end of the century. So we are not too far, and this is a radical change. And what Nijinsky did was he really had the dancers look prehistoric. He had them cup their hands and turn their knees inward. Now, think about how brutal it is for ballet dancers as it is. Their knees fall apart. Now, imagine doing an hour and a half of jumping with your knees turned in. Okay? Knees turned in this way. And then you combine it with these irregular meters. It must be very, very hard to do. Very hard. We also had very prehistoric, primitive, of course, costumes as well. And so altogether, this piece is a piece of great violence. Also, you've probably heard some of this. Has anybody ever seen Fantasia? Okay, does anybody know what part it is? The dinosaurs. Okay, the dinosaurs is the Rite of Spring. It starts off very calm and then it explodes. So run and get your Fantasia tape and listen to the Rite of Spring, because it's really, that whole movie, of course, is a piece of genius. So we are going to listen to part of the Rite of Spring, and you have many parts, and at home I'd like you to, of course, listen to the beginning, but skip around quite a bit, because there are a lot of parts to this, and they're all so different, and they're all so very interesting. So this is the Rite of Spring, premiered in 1913. Okay, so I hope you have skipped around and have heard the beginning and heard some of the end, the sacrifice. If I do give an extra credit on that one for listening, it will be right at the beginning for that. So fair game for that. But as you can see, it is no wonder by listening to this barbaric primitive music that we are going right into World War I now. It should not be a shock to anybody. So that is really the culmination of this first decade of the visual that we're looking at, and all of the above. And the choreography for this was cutting edge, and people rioted, and Stravinsky was appalled, but Diaghilev loved it. He loved it. But again, Stravinsky, and your book goes out there, your book goes neoclassicist first, then talks about Stravinsky again. And what I want to say is, okay, we get to this point, and then Stravinsky goes into his neoclassic period. And so we have Symphony in C. We actually have a wonderful Oedipus Rex, which is in Latin from Stravinsky. We have the opera Rakes of Progress. So we have some interesting things, but he's going back to that classical kind of style, but not really. We still have that individual rhythmic structure from Stravinsky, and what we heard in this piece of music was incredible dissonance. We are on our way now to atonality, the absence of key, and that's what we're going to discuss next time when we talk about expressionism. We'll talk about Schoenberg, the first composer to go over that line, to fall off the cliff. We have gone this far, and now we're going to jump. Okay? Okay, welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about more of the 20th century. So far, we've gone to France and visited with the Impressionists. Specifically, we looked at the wonderful pastels of Monet and symbolist poetry of Mallarmé and the sound of Debussy. So we saw what was going on in France, something that was very, very modern. And as we get into the first couple decades of the 20th century, we talked about Stravinsky and the Rite of Spring. And certainly this work, very barbaric, very primitive in nature, and we are really going into these uncharted waters, right? We are going away from our major-minor system, which has been set up for centuries, right? And we not only see this in music, we also see certainly in painting. We talked about the Impressionists and how their brushstrokes were very modern, and certainly it is the art of the Expressionists and the music of Arnold Schoenberg that will take us over the cliff. We have gone to the edge of the cliff, and now we're going to fly over it. Okay? We're going to look at the art and the music of the Expressionists. Now, what is Expressionism? Well, Expressionism rejected Impressionism. Okay? Rejected Impressionism as fluff, right? Impressionism, when you think about it, it's the outside, right? It's nature, it's how light hits an object. Expressionism is the inside, okay? Please remember that. Early inspirations in art, certainly Van Gogh, Gauguin, Munch, and the art of the fauves, or the beasts, right? And we know from Van Gogh, if you look at this wonderful painting from 1890, that we see in this painting swirls of color, right? Swirls of color, beautiful color, and certainly out of focus, maybe distorted even. And this kind of distortion is going to get heavier and heavier. We've seen it with Picasso and Cubism as well. Van Gogh working in that way as well. And of course, where are we going? We're going to not representing the real world at all. We're going to abstraction. And that's the same thing in music as well. One of the most famous expressionist paintings, and certainly a very early one, is The Scream from 1893 by Edvard Munch, the Norwegian expressionist. I do believe this painting it was stolen and is still gone. Expressionist painters reacted against French Impressionism. They often used jarring colors and grotesquely distorted shapes. Now, this is a very good example, right? This is a very, very good example. The Scream by Edvard Munch. What is that? Male, female, what is it? Well, we don't really know. It is somebody who is experiencing some horror, correct? We know that. And it's also interesting to note that Edvard Munch was a severe alcoholic and an agoraphobic. And if you look at this painting very closely, this figure is out in a wide open space. Is it somebody's nightmare? Is it somebody's dream? Was it Munch's dream of being in an open space? What is it? And so this is horrific. I don't think anybody would say, gee, that's pretty. But that's not what it's for. It is not for you to say, gee, that's pretty. It's for you to be, oh my God, what's going on in that figure's psyche, mind, whatever. This was a time of the exploration of the mind, right? Namely who? Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, right? We had a fundamental dependence upon intuition or subconscious guidance in the creative process. And we have these guys, Freud, in his founding of psychoanalysis, believed that the rational and civilized aspects of human behavior were a shell. And what was this shell? The shell was a volatile, multi-leveled psyche. And Freud dove into that part of our minds and called us all crazy. Right? And a lot of other things. So this exploration of the unconscious certainly coincides with the scream, this painting, right? Of somebody's unconscious, something horrific. Human actions and attitudes were controlled by deeply buried instincts, primary natural urges, which had very little conscious knowledge or limited control. Right? Those of you who have taken Psychology 101 probably know more than I do about this, but I think it's very fascinating that you have the world of dreams going on and Sigmund Freud diving into our minds. You have World War I and the end of World War I, where expressionism was at its height, right? So you have war as well. And we already have seen Picasso and the Impressionists, all of this. It is no wonder that this is just going to explode. And what it is feeling that's going to explode. The major themes of the Expressionist work include nature as utopia, art from non-Western cultures, and the vitality of the big city. And they actually thought humanity would gain from World War I. They would gain from World War I. Artists felt that they played an important role as visionaries of mankind, a very important role, and not only with art and music, but literature as well. And the art and the music characterized by, well, we're going over the edge finally, atonality. No more will we have a central tone, right? We have been going there since Wagner. We've been going there, and we're finally going to go over that edge. No central tone. Atonality means absence of key. No key. And so, what about artists? Colors. Shocking, bold colors. They also express, certainly, the dark side, the sinister side of the human psyche. And one of my favorite painters, actually, Vasily Kandinsky, 1866 to 1944, born in Russia, and left Moscow at 30 to study in Munich, and he was one of the founders of a group of artists called the Blaue Reiter, okay, the Blue Rider, and his works move in a direction that was of great abstraction, and this is a very good example. Look at the left side of this page, okay? You'll see it on your screen. The upper left-hand corner is an early work of Kandinsky's, much in the Russian tradition. You can see Moscow over that river, okay? Now, if you look over to your left, what you're seeing is something totally different, right? Totally different. Blue Mountain. We are starting to get a little abstract here. And then down on the bottom, we have what's called, this is from 1911, called Romantic Landscape. Romantic Landscape. We can find certainly the horses, but after that, you know, it's a little tough to make out. Kandinsky will also be the guy that goes into abstraction. He's often been called the father of abstraction. And as you can see from these improvisations that I'm going to show you. This improvisation here. And what we have is an image on this canvas that gives us the realm of the unconscious, hallucinated visions that defy the traditional notion of beauty in order to express a more powerfully the artist's inner self. Here is an improvisation. He did many of these. I have one in my living room. I think they're spectacular. Look at the color. This is not Impressionism, people, right? This is not Impressionism. This is abstract. So Kandinsky falls over the cliff. And you know what? His buddy, his partner in crime, his friend, Arnold Schoenberg is what Kandinsky is for painting with Expressionism. Schoenberg is with music. Arnold Schoenberg. I personally hate to be called a revolutionist, which I am not. What I did was neither revolution nor anarchy. 1874 to 1951, Arnold Schoenberg. Arnold Schoenberg. Was he revolutionary? Most people say that his disciples regard him as having brought to its culmination the 1,000-year-old tradition of European polyphony. Now that sounds very complicated. What's polyphony? More than one line of music, right? European polyphony. And what he's doing is he's going to go over that edge. We've set up this tonal system, right? We've set up our major minor system, and he is going to break it down completely. Born in Vienna, right? Expressionism was born in Germany and Austria, 1905 to about 1925, Expressionism. Okay? Schoenberg studied the violin, devoted his life to music. He actually left school to do this while he was in his teens, and didn't have much musical instruction at all. He was introduced by other composers, successful composers, to these wonderful artistic circles in Vienna. Artists such as Kandinsky, and I'm going to say this now, Schoenberg studied painting with Kandinsky. Kandinsky studied music with Schoenberg. Isn't that interesting? As a matter of fact, you can go into the library and find a book called Kandinsky and Schoenberg, and you can follow their life together, which is very interesting. Kandinsky, the Russian tradition. Schoenberg is in the Wagnerian tradition, right? The Wagnerian tradition, that romantic period overhang. And then, as we will see, we will lead into greater abstraction. In Kandinsky's case, not representing the visual world at all. In Schoenberg's case, atonality. Okay? And then, what's very interesting, and I'm just going to bring this in right now, Kandinsky, later on in his life, after this period of great abstraction, is going to give us some more simplified forms. For example, one of his paintings is called Point, Line, and Plane. What is that? What comes to our mind? Geometric figures, and that's exactly what that painting looks like. And how interesting that Schoenberg couldn't do it anymore either. He couldn't stand not having something to hold on to. And so what he did was he came up with his own system. And it's called the 12-tone system. And my friends, this system is so much easier to understand in a lot of ways than the major-minor system, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So Schoenberg, born in Vienna, he had a lot of success very, very quickly. Again, his early style period in that of Mr. Wagner. He was also a wonderful teacher. And I'm going to talk very briefly. I wish I could go into this more. You could do a whole semester on these three guys, Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. These three guys. Schoenberg, the teacher. Schoenberg was a wonderful teacher. As a matter of fact, he came over to the United States and taught at UCLA because he escaped World War II. And he was a fantastic teacher, and his disciples, very famous, as we'll talk about in a minute. He was an active teacher in Vienna, and he really devoted himself to his students. And he moved closer and closer as we get into the first decade of the 20th century into the complete rejection of tonality, the complete rejection of tonality. The First World War unfortunately interrupted his creativity. Although he was past 40, they still asked him to serve in the military. So we have a silence of 7 years between 1915 and 1923, during which he clarified his position in his own mind and evolved a set of structural procedures to replace tonality. And this, my friends, was called the 12-tone system, a method of composing with 12 tones. And I'm just going to go real simple with you. All you have to do is come up with 12 tones, okay? F sharp, A flat, G flat, D sharp, E. You know, you just come up with 12. Then you have what's called a row. A row. And then you start composing your piece, your melodies, based on this row. You can use the row forward, you can use the row backwards, you can use it from outside in, inside out. And it's very, very mathematical, of course. But it is a way of organizing a composition. And so with Schoenberg, he goes into this period where it's totally abstract, very expressionist, atonality, absence of key, and then in the early 1920s, we have this 12-tone system that he creates. Unfortunately, Schoenberg's life ended with the coming to power of Hitler in 1933. He did convert to Catholicism. Now, another composer converted to Catholicism as well from Judaism, Gustav Mahler. Whether they did this as something they really, really believe, or they did this as something to keep them alive, I don't really know. But he did convert to Catholicism, and it's very interesting. After leaving Germany, he found it spiritually necessary to go back to the Hebrew faith, which I think is very, very interesting. He arrived in the United States in the fall of 1933, taught in Boston, and then joined the faculty of the University of Southern California, and received a professorship, actually, at the University of California in Los Angeles. 1940, he proudly called himself an American citizen, and he taught until age 70 or so, and continued his musical activities until his death in 1951. This man was a seeker of truth until the end. He didn't like to be called a revolutionary, and said, one must go on without asking what lies before or behind. And he profoundly, profoundly influenced the generation to come. And his two students, Alban Berg and Anton Webern, two wonderful students of his. Alban Berg, the Romantic tradition lives with Alban Berg, and then the 12-tone tradition with Anton Webern. We go two different directions, but he was very inspirational to them. And so Schoenberg takes his points of departure certainly from Beethoven and Wagner and Brahms and Bruckner and Mahler, and he was certainly in his early style period quite in the much in the style of Wagner. Now, what does that mean? We're looking at the blurring of tonality. We're looking at this idea of unending melody. And so his first style period, we're seeing some individuality, but we're also seeing some stuff still left from the Romantic period. Okay?